There's a certain kind of calm you notice in some people. It's not the fake kind you see in someone who's trying too hard to look composed. It's a quieter thing. It shows up in the way they breathe, the way they don't rush to fill silence, the way they don't act like the world owes them a reaction. You can tell they're not performing. They're just steady. Most people assume this kind of calm means life has been easy for them. They picture someone who grew up in a peaceful home, someone who never had to deal with chaos or unpredictable people. But that's rarely the truth. Real calm usually comes from the exact opposite. It comes from someone who's seen enough storms that nothing really surprises them anymore. When you talk to someone like this, you feel it. They don't jump when plans change. They don't panic when something goes wrong. They don't get dragged into drama just because someone else wants a fight. It's like they move at their own pace, even when the world around them speeds up. But here's the thing. Most people miss. Their calm isn't about being above anything. It's not ego. It's not superiority. It's survival. At some point in their life, they learned that reacting too quickly only made things worse. Maybe they had a parent who exploded at everything. Maybe they were the kid who had to stay okay because everyone else around them wasn't. Or maybe they found out early that if they let their emotions take over, nobody was coming to fix the mess for them. So they adjusted. They learned to hold things in place until the moment passed. They learned to keep their voice level even when their chest was tight. They learned to hide the part of them that wanted to scream or cry or slam the door. And over time, that became their default. Not because they're emotionless, but because that was the only way to stay functional. If you look closely, you'll notice something else. People who are truly calm don't try to convince you they're calm. They don't brag about it. They don't talk about how unbothered they are. They're not interested in appearing tough. Their calm is quieter. It's in their posture, their tone, their timing. It's in the way they take a second before answering a question. It's in the way they aren't afraid of silence. And maybe the most interesting part? Their calm is rarely appreciated by the people around them. Some see it as detachment. Others think it means they don't care. But the truth is, they care more than most. They just learn to care without falling apart. This kind of calm isn't flashy. It isn't loud. It's something someone earns after life has pushed them around a few times. And once they have it, they don't let it go. It's the one thing that makes them feel like they have control. Not over the world, but over themselves. A lot of calm people didn't grow up in environments where emotions were allowed to exist freely. They learned early that reacting had consequences. Maybe it meant getting yelled at. Maybe it meant being ignored. Maybe it meant becoming the target of someone else's frustration. Either way, they figured out pretty quickly that their feelings weren't something the room could hold, so they adapted. Kids don't have many tools, so they use the ones they can. Some become loud to get attention. Others become invisible to stay safe. Calm people usually fall into that second group. They became the child who didn't complain, the one who didn't ask for help, the one who learned to read everyone else's mood before deciding what they were allowed to feel. It wasn't that they didn't have emotions, they just learned those emotions didn't matter in the moment. What mattered was keeping the peace, keeping things predictable, not giving anyone a reason to explode. When you grow up like that, you become good at swallowing what you feel before it reaches the surface. By the time they became teenagers, that habit was already built in. They were the friend who stayed neutral in arguments, the one who didn't talk much about what bothered them, the one who people assumed was easygoing, even though inside they were constantly managing themselves like a quiet security team. And here's the part most people don't understand. Staying calm didn't always mean staying okay. It just meant keeping things under control so nothing spiraled. They weren't trying to be strong. They were trying to avoid trouble. When you don't have space to react as a kid, you learn to internalize everything. You teach yourself to think before you speak, but not in the healthy way where you're being thoughtful. You do it because speaking too soon might lead to something you can't handle. This pattern doesn't magically disappear when they become adults. They carry it with them. It shows up in relationships where they hesitate to bring up problems because they don't want drama. It shows up at work where they take on more than they should because they don't want to disappoint anyone. It shows up in small moments, like apologizing for things that aren't their fault, or staying quiet even when they're hurt. People look at them and think, wow, they're so calm. But that calm was shaped by years of needing to be predictable in rooms that weren't safe. And if you ask them today why they're so steady, most won't say it out loud. But deep down, they know the truth. They were trained that way, not by choice, but by survival. People who seem naturally calm usually have this quiet habit they don't even notice anymore. They push their own feelings to the back of the line. It's something they picked up a long time ago, the idea that what they feel can wait until things settle. And because life rarely settles, they end up carrying a lot more than anyone realizes. It's not that they're numb. They feel everything. They just learn to pause their reactions so the situation doesn't get worse. If something stressful happens, they go straight into problem-solving mode. They focus on what needs to be done, what needs to be fixed, who needs to be calmed down. Their own emotions stay parked in the background, waiting for a moment that usually never comes. This habit makes them look strong from the outside. People admire how steady they are. They get labelled as the reliable one, the person who won't panic, the one you call when things are falling apart. And they don't complain about that role. But it does come with a cost. Because when you always delay your feelings, they don't disappear. They just pile up quietly. You don't break down in public, but you start carrying stress in your shoulders, in your jaw, in the way you sigh without realizing it. You tell yourself you'll deal with it later, but later never seems to show up. Calm people are good at handling emergencies because they've been doing it their whole life. What they're not good at is noticing when they're running on empty. It's easy for them to assume they're fine just because they're not visibly upset. But inside, it's like they have a whole backlog of unprocessed moments, things they never reacted to because they were too busy managing everything else. Sometimes you see it come out in private. They'll sit alone at night and suddenly feel everything all at once. Not because something new happened, but because their mind finally has enough quiet to bring it forward. It's the only time they feel safe enough to let themselves actually feel something. This habit doesn't make them weak or broken. It's just how they learn to survive. They handle the world first and themselves second. And even though it makes them look calm on the outside, inside they're often holding back more than anyone knows. One thing you notice about calm people is how little they react to things that would set someone else off. Someone snaps at them and they don't bite back. Someone makes a rude comment and they don't carry it all day. It's not because they don't feel it, it's because they've learned to slow down the space between what happens and how they respond. They don't jump to conclusions. They don't assume every sharp tone is an attack. Instead, they step back in their mind and ask themselves, is this really about me? Most of the time, they already know the answer. Probably not people project. People act out. People speak from stress. And calm people have seen enough of that to stop taking everything as a personal insult. This habit didn't come from being carefree. It came from understanding how messy people can be. When you grow up around unpredictable emotions or unstable situations, you start noticing patterns. You learn that most reactions have nothing to do with you. You learn that absorbing everything only drags you into chaos you didn't create. So as adults, they protect their peace by giving people space to be human without making it their responsibility. It's not detachment. It's clarity. They know reacting too fast usually makes things worse, so they wait. They observe. They choose their response instead of letting the moment choose it for them. And sometimes that calm silence says more than any argument ever could. People love having someone calm around. It makes everything feel safer. But what most don't see is the pressure that comes with always being the steady one. When you're the person who never loses control, everyone starts depending on you without even thinking about it. You become the friend who gets called when someone's life is in pieces. You become the partner who's expected to stay composed no matter what. You become the co-worker who quietly fixes problems while everyone else reacts. And after a while, it stops feeling like a choice. It feels like a job you never applied for. Calm people rarely complain about this. They're used to carrying things. They're used to being the one who can handle it. What they don't admit is how isolating it becomes. Because when everyone sees you as the stable one, nobody checks if you're actually okay. People assume you don't need help. They assume you don't struggle. They assume you'll always be fine. And the truth is, calm people often break in private because that's the only place they feel allowed to. Being the stable one gives them identity, but it also takes something from them, the freedom to fall apart like everyone else. And calm people don't get pulled into chaos the way others do. When something goes wrong, their first instinct isn't to argue. It's to understand what's actually happening. They've seen how fast emotions can turn a small issue into a full-blown mess, so they focus on clarity instead of noise. They don't raise their voice, not because they're trying to be noble, but because they've learned arguments rarely fix anything. They'd rather figure out the root of the problem than waste energy trading blame. To them, fighting feels like a distraction from the real issue. When someone comes at them with anger, they don't mirror it back. They slow things down. They ask simple questions. They stick to facts. They try to keep the situation grounded because they know someone has to, and most of the time they're the only one in the room who can stay level enough to do it. But this isn't about being superior. It's about wanting peace more than they want to win. They'd rather walk away with understanding than walk away with victory that doesn't fix anything. It's not that they can't argue, they just don't see the point unless there's something real to work through. Calm people look composed on the outside, but that doesn't mean they're untouched by stress. They just deal with it quietly. Most of their struggles happen internally, in moments no one else notices, late at night, in the car, or during those pauses where they zone out for a second longer than usual. They rarely talk about what hurts them, not because they don't trust anyone, but because they don't want to add weight to someone else's life. They've spent so long being the person others lean on that asking for help feels almost foreign. Even when they're overwhelmed, they convince themselves they can handle it alone. Sometimes it shows in subtle ways, the way they shut down for a day, the longer than normal exhale, the slight tension in their voice. Small signs that something's wearing on them, but they hide it well, because they don't want to be the source of tension or worry. Their calm doesn't mean they're untouched. It just means they've learned to carry their battles alone, in quiet spaces where nobody sees the cracks. Calm people don't get swept away by the moment the way others do. When conflict hits, they don't jump to the worst-case scenario or start imagining things that aren't actually happening. They anchor themselves in what's real, right in front of them. They pay attention to tone, to body language, to the actual problem, not the story their mind could spin. They've learned that staying present keeps them grounded. It keeps them from saying things they'll regret or reacting to emotions that aren't theirs to carry. While others get caught up in what something means, calm people focus on what it is. They break the moment down into pieces they can understand. What's being said? What's actually needed? What's the real issue here? That's how they keep themselves from spiraling. They don't let the heat of the moment decide who they are. They slow their breathing. They keep their voice even. And they choose their words carefully. Not because they're trying to win, but because they don't want chaos to take over. This ability to stay present isn't natural. It's practiced. It comes from years of learning that losing control only makes the situation bigger than it needs to be. Staying grounded is their way of making sure things don't get worse. There's a moment in every argument where people usually take a side. Some double down. Some get louder. Some start defending things they don't even believe in, just because their pride is on the line. Calm people don't move that way. They're not interested in turning every disagreement into a battle, and they're not trying to walk out of a conversation as the winner. To them, winning has never felt like victory if the relationship loses in the process. They've learned that most conflicts aren't about the surface issue. They're about fear, frustration, or feeling unheard. So instead of getting stuck on proving a point, they focus on understanding what's actually going on underneath. They don't ask themselves, how do I beat this person? They ask, how do we walk out of this without doing damage? That mindset alone changes everything. I know calm people would rather keep the connection intact than score an argument nobody remembers a week later. And a big reason for that is experience. They remember what it was like being around people who treated every disagreement like a war. They remember how exhausting it was to live in a space where someone always needed the last word. They remember how pointless it felt watching small arguments turn into days of silent treatment or resentment. So they made a quiet promise to themselves they wouldn't live that way. When someone tries to bait them into a fight, they don't take the hook. When someone throws a sharp comment, they don't throw one back just to even the score. When they're misunderstood, they don't panic. They slow down and explain. Not because they're weak, but because they understand the real cost of fighting, the distance it creates. Calm people don't fear being wrong. They fear losing the people who matter over something that didn't need to become a war. That's why they pause before responding. It's why they take a breath when things get heated. It's why they let go of small annoyances instead of letting them build up into something bigger. And here's the part most people overlook. Choosing peace doesn't mean they feel peaceful inside. Sometimes they let something go, even when it stings a little. Sometimes they walk away from an argument with things they wish they had said. Sometimes they keep the peace at the expense of their own comfort, because they're trying to protect the relationship. It's not passivity, it's prioritization. They decide what matters, and their ego almost never makes the cut. People often misinterpret this as indifference, like calm people don't care enough to fight. But that's the opposite of the truth. They care so much that they don't want to let anger speak on their behalf. They don't want to throw words into the air that can't be taken back. They don't want to turn a moment of tension into a problem that lasts for days. They've lived through enough emotional storms to know that peace you fight for is more valuable than a point you win. And if you watch closely, you'll notice that people feel safer around them because of this. Not because calm people avoid conflict, but because they handle conflict without turning it into a battlefield. They treat disagreements like something that can be worked through instead of something that needs to be conquered. There's strength in that, a quiet kind of strength that doesn't need recognition. They don't expect applause for it. They don't see it as special. It's just the way they learn to survive without burning every bridge in the process. They'd rather walk away knowing the connection stayed intact than walk away with a win nobody respects. People often look at someone calm and assume nothing gets to them. They think the steady tone, the relaxed posture, the quiet listening means the person isn't bothered. But calm people feel everything, sometimes even more deeply than the ones who react out loud. They just don't show it in the moment. When something hurts them, they don't lash out. They don't crumble. They hold it together until they're alone, and that's when it hits. They replay the conversation. They question whether they should have spoken up. They sit in the feeling longer than anyone realizes because they've trained themselves not to unload emotions onto others. Their silence isn't emptiness, it's containment. What people misunderstand is that calm is a response, not proof of how deeply something lands. Calm people absorb the moment, process it slowly, and deal with it quietly. They don't broadcast their pain. They don't make it someone else's problem. But inside, they're sorting through the same doubts, frustrations, and disappointments as anyone else, sometimes even more. Being calm doesn't mean they're unaffected. It just means they've learned to protect the situation first and themselves later. And that's not always strength. Sometimes it's just a habit they don't know how to break. At some point, calm people realize they can't keep everything inside forever. Staying quiet might keep the peace, but it also keeps them from being understood. And that's when they start learning a new skill. Speaking up without abandoning the steadiness they've relied on their whole life. They don't suddenly turn into someone loud or confrontational. That's not who they are. Instead, they begin taking small steps. They say what bothers them before it builds up. They voice their needs even if it feels uncomfortable. They share what they're feeling without waiting for the perfect moment that never comes. It's not easy. Every time they open up, there's a small part of them that fears they're creating conflict. There's a part that worries they'll be misunderstood or dismissed, but they do it anyway because they've learned that silence doesn't protect relationships. It slowly erodes them. What helps them most is realizing they don't have to choose between calm and honesty. They can be steady and still speak the truth. They can express emotion without losing control. They can set boundaries without starting a fight. It's not about being louder, it's about being real. And once they see that speaking up doesn't destroy anything, that sometimes it even brings people closer, they start trusting their voice a little more. There's a lot people admire about calm individuals, but trying to copy them the wrong way can backfire. Some people look at their steadiness and think the lesson is to shut down emotionally. That's not it. Their calm isn't about being numb, it's about being deliberate. What you can learn from them is simple. You don't have to react the second something happens. You don't have to rush to defend yourself. You don't have to match someone else's intensity just because they're overwhelmed. You can pause. You can breathe. You can decide how you want to show up. Calm people teach you that there's power in slowing the moment down. There's clarity in not taking everything personally. There's strength in choosing peace over pride. None of that requires hiding your emotions. It just requires understanding them. You don't have to shut yourself off to stay grounded. You don't have to pretend you're unbothered. You just have to create a little space between what you feel and what you do next. That space is where calm lives, and the truth is, anyone can build that. Not overnight, not perfectly, but slowly. By noticing your triggers, by choosing patience over impulse, by recognizing when something isn't worth the fight, by speaking up before resentment builds, by letting yourself feel emotions without letting them steer the whole situation. Calm isn't something you're born with. It's something you practice without losing your depth, your sensitivity, or your humanity.